Welcome back, everyone, to the Kingdom Life Unfiltered podcast. Today, I am so excited to be interviewing just one of my favorite leaders, Nate DeTracy. We are going to be talking a little bit about how he views network marketing as ministry. I am just so excited to dive into this. So, let me tell you a little bit about Nate, and then I'll let him fill in the gaps. So he is a top 1% leader in network marketing. They have built 7 to 8 figure businesses multiple times. And he is also an IFBB Pro, which if you are not in the industry, means he's a bodybuilder. If you're watching this instead of listening, you'll be able to see how. But Nate is also an amazing husband, father, and just an incredible leader on our team. And so I'm just excited to have him share a little bit. Nate, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Yeah, well, as you said, I have a past of bodybuilding. I think bodybuilding played a very important role in my life. When I was young, 23 years old, my parents ended up passing away in a car accident. And I think, like anybody that's young, not having really good influence, it's very easy to fall down the wrong paths. And so bodybuilding was kind of my avenue to stay away from the drugs and the alcohol and that type of thing, and really helped me to kind of create a story for myself. And so I did that for many, many years and became very successful before there was social media. I'm kind of dating myself, but that was a long time ago. And so it served a purpose. However, it wasn't really until I had kind of gone through that and got to the very top level that I realized it was kind of unfulfilling. And I didn't have a lot of God in my life. I hadn't really dug in and worked through the emotions of my parents, losing my parents. And so I started having all these ripple effects of negative things in my life, and ended up going through first a divorce and then a bankruptcy, and just was really struggling. And so that's kind of where I really had to decide if I was going to have a shift in my life. And luckily at that time I found both the church or I should say I rediscovered the church, because I grew up as an altar boy.
Oh, I was an
Yeah,
altar girl.
oh, were you? Oh
Yeah.
my gosh. So yeah, so I was, as a kid, I was a pleaser. I loved to serve. And so as an altar boy, like, they had different levels, and if you hit the top level, if you were the most responsible, I guess it was at the time, you got to do services for weddings. And so every summer they would hire me to do weddings, and so it was a lot of fun. I'd make $10 a wedding. So
Oh my goodness, that's so funny. I did the same thing, and I did weddings too. And then I kind of fell away, and then I found God again. But yes, oh, I love that. That's awesome. Okay, so that was what brought you back to the church then, right? So how then did you get into network marketing?
well, so during the kind of the final stages of bodybuilding, I owned a gym, a full-size gym, and the crash happened 2008, 2009. And so I was really struggling behind the scenes. And so I had a really pristine gym. It was a very high end, as far as the equipment and the look of it. But I had a lot of bodybuilders and national and professional, as trainers. And so we attracted a lot of people, but in hard times, everybody drops their prices. And so all the gyms all the bigger gyms could afford to drop their prices down to $10 a day. And I was struggling because I still needed to make, 80, 90, $100 per member. And so I found a period of time where I was struggling so bad that I had to make a decision to keep the lights off at home, the electricity off at home, to keep the gym going. And nobody knew this because I was too prideful. And so in had walked my future wife, and she kind of had a story of her own. Like, she was a single mom of two. At the time, I think she had a 2 and a 4-year-old. And she had walked away from a very, very abusive relationship, to the point where she had been beaten so bad she was bleeding out her ears, and just packed up one suitcase and started her life over. So she was living with her mom, working 2 jobs, and doing this direct sales thing on the side, and grinding it out. And to be completely honest, at the beginning when she approached me, I just had too much ego. I had sponsorships, and direct sales to me just did not seem like, something that I could, as a guy, grab onto. And so I watched her from afar for probably, I would say, about a year, where she really had to go a grind. And, any successful business, there's always a grinding point. And then all of a sudden she started catching a wave and she was making $5,000 a month. And then a couple months later, she doubles it and she stops personal training and she's starting to live this life on her own terms. And I'm struggling. And so it really forced me to take a look at what she was doing, to humble myself. And long story short, I chased her in the business for a while and then eventually chased her in a relationship. And she was one of the very first, or she was the very first in that company to get to the very top level of that business as a single mom. And so I chased her to that level and then we got married and they created a couple more levels for us.
Oh, I love that story. It doesn't get old. I've heard it so many times. It's so good. What first led you to view business, especially network marketing, not only as just an income, but also as ministry?
Yeah, I was very fortunate during my path for the first year when I dove back into the church. The reason why I did, to be honest, was when I got into direct sales, it was completely different. In the industry I was in, as far as fitness and personal training and nutrition, it really was all about, cutting somebody else's legs out to make yourself look better, right? Like it was always telling why you were better than the other person and trying to build that name for yourself. And when we got into direct sales and I started really paying attention, it was crazy how many pastors and teachers and coaches were a part of the industry and how they were willing to pour into me when they weren't making money on me. And it just baffled me at first. And just not having parents and like really seeking that relationship and that family, it really drew me in. So I remember specifically, I earned this event. They had it was a Sunday optional service, and I was very young in the business. I'd signed up for the business. There's a time when you sign up, they say in direct sales, and then a time where you actually do the business. Yeah. I signed up in 2007, but I didn't do anything until the end of 2009. And so at the beginning of 2010, they had an incentive trip that you could earn. And this is right when I came to Jen and said, okay, I need this. And she's like, okay, let's sprint for this. This is an incentive. You're going to have to stretch really hard. At the time I had no time. And so I just put people in front of her. I had a lot of influence and I would just put people in front of her. I would go do my personal training and my nutrition and all those things. And she was just doing the job for me. She was selling for me. And so I built really fast in the first 3 to 4 months and I earned this trip. And so at the end of the trip, they said, hey, you don't have to believe to belong here, but we have a Sunday experience if you want to be a part of it. And it just caught my attention. I'm like, okay, I grew up in this. To be honest, I was an altar boy. I knew all the prayers, but I didn't really know what they meant.
Right.
And so I sat in it and I just started bawling because I started reflecting back on just how I didn't really love myself. I didn't feel loved. I felt alone. And it brought me on this journey of rediscovering myself and rediscovering that God was in pursuit the whole time, but I was kind of pushing him away. And so that's what really got me into my faith walk. And then from there, just by nature, I didn't want to be a consumer. So I found a church that I could be a part of. It was a very small church. And I noticed that the main pastor, he had come up from Texas and he was planting this church. And he would play the drums. And then he would wipe his brow and then he would get up and he would do the announcements and then he'd go sit down for a few minutes and then he would come up and then he would do his sermon. And I was just like, man, okay, I'm just sitting here for about a year and just taking stuff in and consuming. I am very scared to get up on stage and speak. I'm like, maybe this is my opportunity to help, a cause, but also get better at my trade. And so I asked him, I said, hey, could I put together a team that takes a little bit of that off of you, right? And we do the announcements. And he was like, sure. And so I created a team. And because I was in charge, now I have to show up at a different level. And it just kind of forced me. And so that led into me doing that and volunteering for a couple of years, led me into kind of their inner circle. There was a core 4 and I became part of that. And so I got to do a lot of just asking questions and just being behind the scenes and having deep conversation about God and just learning from people that had been a part of churches, and they came from the Bible Belt. So it was very different down in the South. And there was a reason why they were coming up to serve in this area, especially Seattle. Seattle is a non-believing area for the most part. And so I got to really absorb and really understand and just really be ministered to at a very high level. So in saying that, what it started making me realize is, a pastor shared this with me. He said, Nate, he said, when you're good, he's like, you disciple, and then when necessary, you use words, right? And so that really hit me, and it stuck with me. And I said, if I could show my fruit through actions, and I could show people that I loved them, and even if they didn't treat me well, the whole turn the cheek. I'm like, what is the deep meaning of that? That you're going to continue to be who you are regardless of how you're treated. Could I practice that in the church, but also knowing that God is everywhere? I think one of the misconceptions is God is in a building, but he's not at your work, And so if he's everywhere and your faith is supposed to be given to people and discipleship is really about stepping into the unchurched areas, I'm like, this is a really great opportunity to take the things that I'm learning here. And I became somebody at the church that was very good at bringing people in. And I could do that, I could do that in my business. I could do that at church, but at my work, my place of work, I could start to practice, how do I earn people's trust and then minister to who they are, right? And be okay with where they're at, because I'm not the person that's saving them. That's God's job. But could I be a bridge? Could I be a bridge so that they could be interested in where I'm going, why I'm doing it, and ask, why do I have fruit in those areas?
That is so good. So crazy that you came back to your faith because of network marketing. Actually, I did too. One of my leaders in one of my first companies, it was like 18 years ago, they were the ones that baptized me. That they just had like a joy about them, and they were such amazing leaders. And I was like, they are different than anyone I know in my whole life. And I just started asking questions. I was trying to figure out why, and I couldn't find another reason other than Jesus. And so that's amazing. I love that story. What then does it look like on a practical level, like on a daily basis, like when you're working with people, ministering to them, and when you are in your daily activities, like if someone is in network marketing, they're like, all right, in my income producing activities, like how do I play this out?
Yeah. How do you play out your faith?
Yeah.
Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, here's what I believe. I believe our faith teaches us foundational pieces in life, right? And I don't think there's one way to do anything, but I think you start to pick up on culture and connection. And even in the Bible, it's interesting because I look at, Matthew 25, like 14 or 16 or something like that. Jesus talks about the master that has the three servants, and he gives them each so many talents, right? Mm-hmm. Well, if you really look in the scripture, number one is he gave them different amounts. So he knew their abilities to begin with, which challenges us to say, okay, how do we lean into our gifts? And if we don't, then maybe we're not going to be as entrusted. So I think that's always something that I think about. And the other thing is he expected them to invest in their gifts, right? The one that he talks about that he let go, it wasn't that one made more than the other. It was that he was proud of two of them, but the other one that if you want to call, squandered his gifts because he didn't lead in abundance, he led in fear, right? That's the one he sent on his way. And so I always just think about, how can I take characteristics from the Bible? I think John Maxwell does a very good job of this. If you know his past, he was actually a preacher, and he stepped out. I don't know if it was in the 60s or 70s. He stepped out away from that and said, you know what? 50% of the world is never going to step into a church. He's like, so how do I church to the unchurched people? How do I minister to the unchurched people? And so he started using biblical principles, but to write business, like how to be successful in business. Well, I look at that stuff as well. And I'm just saying, okay, well, if I could teach people how to, number one, believe in themselves and know that they're not alone, I think that's one of the most important things. When you talk about Satan or you talk about Christ, one is telling a lie and trying to keep you by yourself, trying to make you feel like you're all alone. The other one's telling you, you have all the gifts in the world, they're already in you, right? And so how do you speak to that on a consistent basis and get those things out of it? And that's what I love about our business is anybody can do it. And so you step into a business where there's very little on the front end as far as investment. but it's all about personal growth. It's all about sweat equity. It's all about teaching people those things that are biblical principles. And so, how do you lean into those, find your own gifts? And I think one of the stories I really love is the hero's journey. The hero's journey is a it's a silo, if you will, of first like understanding where you belong in the world, right? And then becoming curious because you get bored of what you're doing and you feel like you're built for more. And so you're looking for somebody to follow. And eventually you have to let some things die in order to become the hero or to discover your own personal gifts. But to go around that full circle, you have to at some point let go of being the hero and say, how do I serve the next hero up? You know, and so I love this type of business because you can bring people through those. I call it the growth track. You can bring people through that growth track and really start to teach them how do you find the people in your life that have the fruit that you want and stop listening to the people that don't, because there's a ton of those people out there, right? And so, and then how do you follow them to discover your own personal gifts and make it yourself? But then the humility in it is letting that go and saying, okay, well, I don't need to be in the spotlight anymore. I proved myself. I know I have the gifts. Let me show the next person up. Let me become that where the teacher, you know, the teacher teaches the next hero. And so again, that's not very specific, but in our business, I feel like we do that over and over and over again. And that's what makes it really special.
Yes, I agree. So for network marketing, I feel like sometimes it gets a bad name and sometimes it's not done well. So I would love to hear a little bit of like, what does it mean to you? And what have you seen in the business where, because I feel like there's a right way to do it and there's a wrong way to do it. And I feel like people have seen the wrong way and it sometimes turns them off to something that could be just an incredible blessing for them.
Yeah. Unfortunately, I feel like people put network marketing in a box or direct sales, whatever you want to call it. Because the truth is, because there's not a big buy-in, anybody can do it. So a lot of people try, but they think of it like a lotto ticket, right? If I sign somebody up and I get lucky and I get the right person, then I'm going to be rich. And that just doesn't happen. Like how many people win the lotto? Not very many.
Yeah.
And so just like anything, just like a restaurant, just like a movie, just like anything that you look at out there, any kind of profession or entertainment or anything, there's always going to be good and bad. And what you have to realize is you have to, if you step into something like this, is you have to recognize, I think first, what you don't like about something so that you can be intentional to do what you think is going to change that. And so, you know, like you said, there's really good people in this industry, and then there's really people that just haven't put in the time to be good. Right. And I think in a business like this, you have to build it into yourself. I call it thick skin. You know, every day you're assessing what you've done in the past and how you approach it, because God didn't give us the ability to do things right the first time. He gave us the ability to go back and make it right, right? So we have to understand that everything's a process. Like if you were a basketball player, they say you have to take 10,000 shots before you become very efficient, right? Or playing a piano or whatever, you know, 10,000 hours. Like, so the same thing goes for this. You know, in our society, we go to college, or, you know, a lot of people go to college. Those 4 years are gray area. It's like where you're learning and you're discovering and you're doing all those things, right? And then you go into the workforce and then you have to get good at whatever trait you're doing. I'm like, let me show you a different way, you know? And first, I think the most important thing is asking enough questions to understand what they did first so you can say, okay, here's why this is going to be a little bit different. And here's why you will be more successful.
Yeah, absolutely. And I feel like it's I feel bad sometimes for people that don't give it a chance when I know they could really change their lives. And so I love that you said that, and just really digging into sometimes you don't know what you're doing and you have to understand that there is a learning curve, and you guys are so great at teaching just how to do that and how to do it well. Okay, so what tensions arise when you're like blending business goals with ministry goals?
Yeah. There's been a few times in the past and we're working through this. So I've been a part of 3 direct sales companies. And like you said at the beginning, we've done very well in all 3, doing 7-figure plus in each one of those. But one of the things that's been very frustrating to me is actually helping pastors and churches to do something like this, because one of the fearful things, and it's totally natural, is when you have influence, you want to make sure that you're utilizing that influence to the best of your abilities, and you're not overusing your influence, right? But in this new season, I'm being very intentional to create what I call silos, because I understand pastors are going to speak a certain language, right? Those that have a military background are going to speak a different language. I'm helping doctors now get into their doctor's offices. I'm helping those in the fitness world. They're all different silos, right? And one of the things that I've seen in the past from a lot of leaders in the church is a fearful mindset, but also, I don't want to call it a poor mindset, but being afraid, right? Being insecure about making money. And again, when you come back to biblical principles, God always wants you to multiply.
Yeah.
And what I love about the business that we're in is the business, when you make a lot of money, it's a reflection of how many people you help. You cannot make a lot of money if you don't help a lot of people. And so what we're actually working on right now is some tools to really start to talk through that, because there's 2 things that I see that I feel like the church could use help in. One is the fact that a lot of times the tithing has to go to pay the salary, which they need to be paid, right? They're doing a ton of work. And so, but the pastors and the leaders within that church, they need to be paid. And so if tithing has to go to that, obviously it can't go to something else that's a different type of cause. The other thing is, what do you do when you're done pastoring? Like, what happens when you retire, right? Now, I know pastors that they were working at REI afterwards, and they're stuck in a job that all of a sudden they're doing their ministry in there, but they should be retired and enjoying their life and be able to go wherever they want in the world, and they're stuck. Yeah. And so we're creating systems that I think are going to be a lot of fun to speak into, that starts to talk through that. And once you get a couple that start to see it in the right way, and it's done in a delicate way where we understand where people are coming from, but we start to show them. And I also think the world is warming up. I think direct sales for a long time was kind of going backwards. I think affiliate marketing has kind of brought that back and said, hey, you know what? It's okay to share things, whether you're selling spandex or you're selling supplements or whatever it is, right? The whole world is behind affiliate marketing now. And so our particular business, we do a lot of that on the front side. And then we build culture on the backside, which is very natural for those that are in that industry anyway.
So good. And I love that you are creating that for pastors. I didn't know that, but I think that is so needed. And it is really important, because I feel like there's this like kind of prosperity gospel, right? Which is not biblical, but there's also this poverty gospel that's also not biblical. We serve a really abundant God. And I feel like there's too much in church culture that leans one way or the other, like the pendulum swung all the way this way and then it's swaying all the way back, and we just need to like get recentered a little bit. So that'll be really good.
Mark Batterson does a really good job. I've read some of his books, and actually just recently connected to a pastor that he's building a church, kind of a church complex in Vegas, and he's friends with Mark Batterson. Yeah. And I was referring to him when I was kind of pitching this to this new, he's not a new pastor, but he's developing a new church.
I heard about the church.
Yeah, following in Vegas. We were talking through, what Mark did in DC, and just the fact that he started with a little coffee shop, but he totally took a whole area that was abandoned and drug infested, and he turned it into a marketplace, right? And created opportunities for people to connect. And so not only building up the city and giving opportunities for people for jobs, but really having that foundation of, okay, again, how do you minister through what you're doing at work? If you're serving coffee or you're, you have a book club or whatever it is that you're doing in those areas, I think they developed a gym over there as well. And so I just think there's, again, with the right kind of mindset, you have so much potential to impact different people in different ways. And that's the only way you're going to bring, like we were talking about earlier, 50% of the people are not going to walk into a church, but they might walk into a coffee shop, and you can impact them there. So,
yes. So along this journey, what mistakes have you made and lessons have you learned in character or integrity? Like, how has that shaped how you lead now?
Well, I've probably made a lot of mistakes.
Haven't
Sometimes
we
you want
all?
things. Yeah. I think sometimes you want things so bad for somebody. I would say one of the mistakes that we've made in the past, there was a period of time where we stopped tithing at the church and we said, okay, we're going to tithe through. Back in our first company, I think it cost $3,000 to get somebody started in the business. And so we said, okay, we're going to put it into that and we're going to go find people that really want this, but they just can't afford to start. And so we would start, 3 or 4 or 5 people out. But when they didn't invest in themselves, they didn't have the work ethic, And so then we were like, okay, well, we'll do it a little bit smaller. We'll do it on the health side. So we'll do, $400 and we'll help them to become healthier. And I just quickly learned that, and again, unless somebody has something that they have to purchase or there's buy-in on their side, it's very tough to consistently get people to do something. And so I think that's one mistake. I think others is, sometimes you have to be okay with it. This type of business isn't for everybody, as if, anything else. Like there's some people that are never going to be basketball players or surgeons or, there's different professions for different types of people for different reasons. And so again, sometimes you want it so bad for somebody because you see the opportunity and how many people it's saved and what it's done for their life and how it's changed them. And so you want that for people. But sometimes people have to do the work for themselves.
Mm. Yeah, I've learned that the hard way too. All right. So, do you have some specific stories of people whose lives have been changed through your work that illustrate kind of that ministry in action?
Well, I'll tell you, I was telling you earlier, one specific that just happened a couple weeks ago. So we have a guy on our team. It's actually a couple, a husband and wife. They own TRT companies. They were actually one of the first founders for Trainerize. They helped develop Trainerize. It's an app for like massive amounts of trainers out there. And they have like cryotherapy places, that type of thing. And they do very well. So what they do is they actually go into businesses and they help turn them around by creating systems, and they become a percentage owner. So and they're part of the Maxwell team, and like just very, very good people. Well, he had messaged me. He put me in one of his pastor friends in a message, and he said, "Hey, he's like, I'm really struggling. I need you guys' prayers." He's like, "We found my brother, his younger brother." He said he's been seizing for, they didn't know for sure, but 11 to 16 hours based off of some tests that they did. And they had to airlift him into a hospital. And then that hospital, he had to be transferred to another one. And he was in the ICU, I think, for 3 days, and had a breathing tube, was not functioning. Like essentially they were preparing for his death.
Yeah.
And so I thought, it's, again, you're like, your mind goes in all different directions. And I'm like, I think the appropriate thing is to tell everybody that knows him and start a prayer circle. But also sometimes people, want to keep things private. But I made the decision. And so everybody starts reaching out to him, and 2 days go by, and he's reaching back out, and we're having conversation back and forth, and he's struggling. And then he messages me at, I believe it was like 5 o'clock one evening. And he sends me a picture of him, and he's got tubes in him. He's laying there. He's like, he hasn't moved for so many days. He sends me a picture 2 hours later, and he's standing up, and he's with his I think it was his other brother, and they're joking around, and he's asking for food, and the doctors are just dumbfounded. Like they're just like, it's a miracle. And so number one, it was amazing, right? It shows the power of prayer. For my friend that was in our business, he's like, I've been around ministry for a long time. He said, I've been a part of churches, but this is my first miracle that I've ever actually witnessed.
Aw.
And so we were talking through that. And, a couple days later, or maybe a day later, Charlie Kirk, was shot, and so we were talking about, two different types of miracles, and we were going back and forth, and I was talking with him and a pastor, and I was like, it's so interesting because I said, there were so many people, even though later on, we found out, that Charlie was shot and pretty much instantly died. There were so many people that were praying for a miracle. But yet I feel like death is a huge part of our story that we don't really, I think, a lot of times understand.
Yeah.
Because since it's happened, look how many people know Charlie Kirk and how many people now are reading the Bible and doing different things, right? And so that's a miracle in itself, because it 10x's or 100x's or whatever the amount of people that are aware of faith. On the other side was his brother that nobody knew, and he needed to see that miracle to increase his faith. Right. And so just to see how God works and that we're not the center of the story, it just keeps reminding me, we're not the center of the story. The story's already written. There's a purpose behind everything. Mm-hmm. It gives me a lot of peace, and also prepares my mind for, when things happen, because hard things are going to happen to all of us.
Yeah.
And so we need to be prepared for that, but that there's always a reason behind it. And we might not understand that reason, but there's miracles happening every single day and for a purpose.
Mm. Oh gosh, that like chokes me up. We actually heard that story after the fact, like once he had been healed, and was just, praise God.
Yeah.
What an
amazing.
So amazing. I love that. Oh, okay. So let's get into some practical things. What are some practical tools, systems, or like mindset shifts that you teach to our team?
Yeah. Let's talk about two different things. So I referred to it earlier. I think it's very important in this type of business to create what I call silos. Like I said before, you have let's just say a male military guy is going to be very different and how you speak to them and how you teach them than a stay-at-home mom, mm-hmm. right? And so the principles can be the same, but the tactics have to be different, because they have to be able to understand them and feel like they're a part, that they can grab onto it like it's organic to them. I think one of the things that sometimes we make a mistake in this business is we think it's just one way for everybody, and it's a copy and paste, and it just doesn't hit the same as it does for the person that created whatever that copy is, right? And so I think that's one of the most important things. I think at the beginning you have to figure out like what is the pattern that's common, and that's what you practice, but you got to make it your own. And then as you start to bring people in, and especially when you get to a higher level where you're seeking a lot of people and you're bringing them in quickly, you got to kind of cater to those different types of people. So that's the first thing. The second thing is, I think you have to lean on systems. And you can go back to the church. You look at, biblically, if you go back, the church was, when you think of discipleship, it's almost like you have a wheel with spokes, and you have all these little hubs, right? And they're all teaching small groups and that type of thing. And at one point, all of a sudden, we came to think that, like, if we create these mega churches and everything's just in one building and it has one voice, that's the way to go, because it is easier, mm-hmm. right? But the truth is, as soon as that person passes or decides to shift, or maybe the culture doesn't really align to it, or whatever it is, whatever purpose, now all of a sudden you lose everything. Yeah. And so I think, how do you create duplication? And that's what discipleship is. And the same thing in our business is, how do we create that system that you point to, so that you're not the hero, even though you might know a lot. If you're a doctor or you're a past personal trainer, or you lost a lot of weight and therefore everybody trusts, what you did, how do you continue to say, okay, I can be a highlight, but let's point back to the system. And you get that system humming so that it becomes a flywheel, and anybody can jump into that, and it doesn't matter their background. They can be successful at that if they apply those basics.
Yes. So good. So what is your long-term vision here?
That's a great question. Well, a year and a half ago, we walked away from a business, a 7-figure business, that we didn't believe in the culture anymore. And it's hard to walk away from something that's successful, but it felt really good to take a chance on something that we knew that we could build, that was going to be the right type of culture. And so for me, it was very exciting. I would say for my wife, it wasn't probably as exciting. She's not as much of a risk taker like that. I knew right away, I knew what I wanted to do. And I don't really care about security. I know I have a deep faith that God will put you in the right place to be successful. And as long as you have that, that grind in you. So in saying that, to me, it's in this business, it's building the next generation of leaders. I think right now we have a leadership problem. We have a lot of people that speak a lot of leadership, but when I said earlier, disciple and when necessary, use words, like the issue is a lot of people aren't acting those things out that they're teaching. And I think that we need to, from the families, that's direct sales, I would say, is probably 70% women. What I would love to do is, how do you drive those husbands to work with their significant other? And how do you bring those families closer together, and how to unify them so that the up and coming, the kids get to see, like, what does leadership look like inside the home and outside the home? And how do you go on trips where it's not about drinking, but it's about connecting to people? Yeah. And, how do you create those environments that people are enjoying putting themselves in a position that's a little bit uncomfortable because they know it's going to impact the world, versus can't wait to get a break from, the 9 to 5 that they hate doing. Mm-hmm. And so for me, that's, I don't know if that has a specific end, but I love that. I love thinking about that. We have the ability right now, with the company that we're a part of right now. It's a very fun place to be, because we just found out 2 days ago, we're one of 2 companies ever to do 100 million in their first year. Mm-hmm. And our goal is to do $1 billion in 5 years. There's no companies that have done both of those. And so we're really, like, we're knocking down walls and doing things that haven't been done before. And we feel like we're doing it with the type of culture that is really suppressing ego and saying, how do we all do this together from the very top down? The highest level leaders in the company are all willing to work together, and knowing that that's not always easy. It's sure. Actually really hard, right? And to creating simplicity is hard. But how do we do that and come together and put the effort in that, so that together as a team and a family, like, we can go out there and truly change the world?
Gosh, that's so good. I'm so excited about just the vision and the mission and the culture here. It's unlike anything I've ever seen before or been a part of. And so it's just, I don't know, so grateful that God led me to this space. So if anyone wants to hear more about that, then you definitely got to chat with either me or Nate, and we'll get you some more details. But let me get you to share with a little bit, because I know there's some people in network marketing, they're faith motivated, but they're just struggling. And so what first steps would you recommend to them? What advice would you give them?
I would say, anytime I sit down with somebody that is either struggled or they're brand new, I'd say, first, who is your target market? Okay, because if you throw such a broad net, it's very difficult to be good to everybody, mm-hmm. right? And so you have to figure out, like, okay, what is your cadence? Who are you? Like, who are you trying to attract? And so once you figure that out, I usually tell people, let's figure out 3 pillars, three different types of people. So things that you have done in your past that could be attractive. So if you've lost a bunch of weight, okay, well, then we'll work in that avenue of weight loss, because we know that you can tell that story. Right. If you're very passionate about your faith, okay, well, we can work in that avenue, right? If you're having a military background, or maybe we had some military guys. This is why it's really on my heart to work with militaries. We have a lot of people that have come from a place where they were sergeants, or they were essentially a hero in that industry, and then got injured, and then had nothing once they stepped back into the normal life, right? And all of a sudden had to rediscover themselves and figure out who their identity was, mm-hmm. right? And so, or maybe you're somebody like myself, where, my parents passed away. And so I love connecting with people that have gone through traumas, because I can put my arm around them and say, hey, me too, but this happened for a reason, and let's find out why. Let's become the best we can be. Mm-hmm. And so once you find those, it becomes really easy to have the conversation. And I wouldn't think of this like sales, because the most common thing we get is, I'm not good at sales. And so what I always challenge people to say is, what if you were telling your story, right? And what if you were asking questions, and what if you had a connection, a solution to a problem? If you were connecting them, And that could help them. Is that selling them, right? What if you took yourself out of it and you're just a connector? That's the first thing. And then the second thing is, I love the phrase, it'd be hard not to root for you if I only knew your story. Like this, that's something that our world needs. There's so many people that's trying to divide. It's because you don't truly understand their story. You don't understand what they've gone through and why they're harsh or why they're closed off or why they're angry or those types of things. But if you did, that's why I think the Father is always rooting for us and always pursuing, because he knows every single thing that we've been through. And there's probably a little bit of sorrow there and just like, hey, I know he's rooting for us. And so the same thing in this type of business is, who can we go out there and root for? Like, who can we attach to? And that starts with your own story. That's the easiest place. And so when you start to look at this business like that, I call it relaxed intensity. Like, you're going to be very intentional about reaching out to people. That's your job. But if it's not for them, or you can't crack that shell, again, or you can't find a reason to help them, then it's not for you. It's okay. And when you operate that way, people feel that, they feel your heart. And then all of a sudden you're something totally different than anything they've experienced before. Now, even if they weren't interested, they trust you. Mm-hmm. And so then you building that trust over time, that's ministry, right? That's ministering to people and their needs and being true to who they are versus you trying to sell something and knocking on every single person's door and pitching them no matter what they say. That's a whole different ballgame. And that's what we don't do that.
Right. Oh, that is so good, because I feel like so many people are like, I just want to help people. I just want to serve people. Well, that's what you're doing. You just have to make sure that you're doing it authentically and with love and not pushing the conversation or pushing people into something when they aren't asking for it, So I think that's great. All right. So as we're wrapping up, is there any other tips or anything else that you'd like to leave with us?
I think my biggest tip in life is just be curious. I think we help a lot of people when we're curious. I think that, and I'm not just talking about business. I'm talking about just in general life. Like you create a lot of connections when you stop thinking about yourself so much. And I'm one of those people that I've always had a lot of internal insecurities. And so when I used to be a bodybuilder, I would get up on stage almost naked, but I would be scared to death to talk to 4 people in a room. And so to the point when Jen first helped me and she was training me, there was a period of time we used to call mixers. They were like gatherings that you could talk about the products and that kind of stuff. And she was supposed to lead it. It was at my gym, and we had about 15 people there. And she called, and she was just being funny, but she called and she's like, yeah, I'm not gonna be there. You're gonna have to take this one. Just knowing how scared I was. And I was like, you get here right now. And I was so scared. I would have a hard time saying my name in front of people. But the thing that I love about this is it helps you to start to get over yourself. And the truth was, I was so involved in who I was and insecure that I wasn't actually, if I could just look out into the audience and say, okay, tell me about yourself, or tell me, it would decrease that stress, because it starts to become about that person. And then you just naturally, as a human, you want to help that person if you know you can. And so that's one of my biggest pointers in life, is just ask a lot of questions and just keep asking questions until all of a sudden something pops in your head and you're like, oh my gosh, I can help you. I can connect you to this person, or you should go to this church, or you should try this product, or you got to meet this person. Like those are the kind of conversations that lead us to trust and relationship.
Yeah. I remember when I first started in the online space, I was like, fine. I was like, I literally was like arguing with God. I was like, fine, I'll do it. I was like, I'm not taking selfies. I'm not showing up on camera. I'm not speaking on camera ever. And here I am behind a microphone.
I look at you now. Yep. Okay.
It's so funny. So don't count yourself out, right? Oh gosh. Well, Nate, thank you so much. This has been such a powerful conversation. And I just love how network marketing can be something so much more than just building a paycheck, and truly be about advancing the kingdom and ministering to people, and also being an incredible vehicle to build some kingdom wealth and make an impact. And so that is something that is really on my heart. So thank you so much. I will put all the information and how to follow Nate, go follow him on Instagram and all of that in the show notes. So thank you, everyone, and we'll see you next time.
See you guys.
Awesome.